for joining me for this conversation that I'm excited to have because it's a topic that we don't get to talk about enough. It's something that we all use every single day and is changing in the line and in the time of COVID. But here I am in New York. So, hello, and I'd like to welcome my guest, Liam Blank, who is originally from Rhode Island, but has ventured off into New York and has become the Tri-State Transit Policy Communications Director. Did I say that right?
I am the Policy and Communications Manager for Tri-State Transportation Campaign, which is a nonprofit organization that advocates for sustainable mobility in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut.
It's awesome. And the reason, of course, why I wanted to have you on was to discuss some things that, you have been working on, and things that are really going to impact our administration as we go forth. There definitely were a lot of projects that were left undone by the Trump administration and the federal government. Why don't you explain to us why we should care about transit? What did they leave behind?
Well, particularly right now in COVID, we have a situation where we need to be starting projects that are going to allow us to jumpstart the economy again. And if people can't move between where they live and where they work, then it's kind of hard to restart the economy. There's been a lot of shifts in how people commute during this pandemic, but it's going to shift again dramatically as the vaccines roll out. People are going to be slowly returning back to offices, and we're pretty confident that the desire for city living will still continue on the trend that it was on before the pandemic.
I definitely want to move back to the city. I am currently out in the suburbs in Westchester, being bougie, but loving it. But I take transit into the city. Sometimes I'll Uber, sometimes I'll drive myself. Oftentimes I'll even take the Metro North. But what I'm noticing more is how are people's behaviors changing? As we saw, 70 million people traveled nationwide over Thanksgiving, the holiday weekend. And, there's good, there's bad, but how are you and your organization looking in terms of safety as we move forward into a post-pandemic world?
Oh, that's a really good question. So far, the way people have been commuting during this pandemic has been that we've seen a significant rise in people driving. Traffic levels on our streets and highways in this region are actually on pace to quickly exceed the levels that they were at pre-pandemic, while transit ridership pretty much across the board is only at roughly a third of what it was before the pandemic. And that makes sense because people are really hesitant to put themselves, on a potentially crowded train or bus, especially before we have a vaccine. So we're not expecting to have ridership return to normal for at least a year. It could be longer. And so transit agencies have to do what they can to make sure that as people are returning to transit, that it's as safe as an experience as possible, which means having to maintain service at high levels so that, if you have a reduced amount of trains and buses running, that means more people crowding onto a fewer number of trains and buses, which we don't want to happen. We want to allow social distancing to still be able to take place. So we need frequent and reliable service. Which is also crucial for many essential workers, especially in New York City, that don't have a car and depend on public transit to get to the hospitals or other essential work sites that they're commuting to. So the MTA is trying new things. They're installing new ventilation or air filtration systems on the commuter rail. That's so far has shown promising results. They are, doing what they can with their marketing to, remind people that they have to wear masks and handing out masks too. They have the MTA has the mask force, which is like a team of volunteers that go out into the subway system and just hand out masks to people for free. So it's things like that, just to remind people that the trans agency really cares about their safety, and they're doing everything they can to make it as safe of an experience as possible. Now, there's some good news out of some studies that have been done, particularly in Europe, that have shown that there has been no trace back to public transit for COVID transmission. So of all the transmissions that have happened, I think it was in Paris, and forgetting the other city that they did it in, it might have been Vienna, where public transit remained open throughout the pandemic. They weren't able to trace back a single COVID infection to somebody having gotten it on public transit.
Now, myself being a New Yorker and yourself also being a New Yorker, I have to interject and just say that in the subway lines, that we can discover some things that are just unidentifiable. Some, bacteria, some whatever. So you are ensuring me that it is safe to ride the subway, ventilation free, and COVID is all good.
If you are following social distancing rules and you're wearing your mask and you're not standing very close to somebody, you should be fine on public transit. All the studies so far have shown that public transit is safe to use during this pandemic as long as you are following thlet's get
into one thing that else I want to get into with you. Full disclosure, me and Liam are friends. Just letting everybody know that, in case he tries to disown me during this interview, we are friends, and I do know that you have encouraged and actually gotten me to get better at using public transit and exploring it and learning about it. You yourself actually ventured to Philadelphia this past weekend, not to put your business out there, but it would have helped you great dearly had the Amtrak Gateway program been completed. How about you tell us about some of the plans, such as the Amtrak Gateway program, such as the Port Authority bus terminal, such as things that will make our transit experience better, safer, and more pleasurable?
Sure. Amtrak's Gateway program is probably the most important infrastructure project that is on the table for this country right now. And fortunately, the Biden administration is a fan of Amtrak and the Gateway program in particular.
Joe takes those trains.
He does, yes.
It sounds like you and Joe would get along. I mean, you love trains, he loves trains.
Yeah, best friends. The Gateway program has been on the table for over 10 years now. The original iteration of it was called ARC, Access to the Region's Core. And that project was basically canceled by Chris Christie, the former governor of New Jersey. And so then we got the Gateway program, which the states and the federal government had agreed to splitting up the funding for. And then Trump came along, and basically it's been sitting on a desk somewhere deep in the bowels of the Department of Transportation. The reason why that project is important is because the two existing rail tunnels that connect Penn Station with New Jersey and the rest of the Northeast Corridor, those two tunnels are 110 years old, and they were severely damaged by Hurricane Sandy with all the salt water that flooded into them. So it corroded the wires and the cement and whatnot. So the tunnels are not dangerous to travel in. They are dangerously approaching a point where they'll have to be shut down for emergency maintenance. And if you shut down one or more of those tunnels, that leaves you, if you shut down one of those tunnels, that leaves you only one other tunnel to handle traffic going in both directions. So you basically just slash the amount of trains that can go into and out of New York by a pretty dramatic amount. And for a lot of people in New Jersey and beyond that rely on the commuter rail system and Amtrak to reach Manhattan for whether it be work or whatever, that's going to be a big problem for them. They're not going to be able to reach their jobs. So the Gateway program proposes building 2 new tunnels under the Hudson River for a cost of $13 billion. And that will allow them, once those tunnels are complete, to fix and repair the existing older tunnels. And then when the whole project is done, there will be 4 tunnels between New York and New Jersey. And that means that we'll be able to essentially double the amount of capacity, the amount of trains that can run from New Jersey into New York. So that project's important, especially as we're trying to jumpstart the economy, because it's going to create jobs just from the construction. And then on top of that, with the added capacity, people have more dependable transit service into New York City, which means that they can get a job in New York and live out in the suburbs in New Jersey and not have to worry about being stuck in gridlock traffic or having a train that, making sure that they have a train that comes in a reliable intervals.
Yeah, I have taken Jersey Transit before, and it was never on time. So who do I complain to? You?
Yeah, well, a lot of people complain to me. I mean, I wish I was the person that could, somehow. Well, I guess I am the person that could somehow fix it, but not just me. I work with a lot of people. But yeah, New Jersey Transit, has decades of chronic mismanagement and severe lack of underfunding. What happens when you do all that is you get the current situation where transit is not dependable. There's frequent breakdowns and delays, and everything.
And the trains are gross. Okay, they're gross.
Yeah, like.
So let's change topics though and talk about something that is no longer gross, which is LaGuardia Airport. LaGuardia Airport, right, for the longest of time, was definitely the Shawshank Redemption of airports, per se. But I personally loved it. I loved going to LaGuardia. It was just like grungy, gritty. It was like, yo, I'm in New York. This is LaGuardia Airport. But as you see, it's gotten a renovation, but you're also have been proposing the air train to LaGuardia, and you seem to have a different idea than our governor, Mr. Cuomo, in terms of how to put it.
Right. So it's Governor Cuomo's proposal is to build the air train as part of his whole LaGuardia redevelopment plan. The air train will connect the airport with Willets Point, the station there for Long Island Railroad, as well as the 7 train. That is basically, I think it's next to City Field is there. So the reason why there's a lot of community opposition for that project in particular is not because people oppose connecting the airport with mass transit. That's actually very needed, and everybody supports that idea. It's with the alignment. The problem is with the alignment of the air train. They're running it down Grand Central Parkway, and the direction of the air train actually goes farther west. It makes people go farther west to then have to go backtrack into the other direction to reach Manhattan. So the alignment doesn't really make much sense, and the time savings aren't significant enough to warrant spending billions of dollars on this project. And the environmental advocates are worried that it will destroy some of the environment because the alignment of the air train is right up along Flushing Bay, which many advocates have spent years trying to restore. So Other ideas that exist are extending the N train from
Don't
historic.
own the idea. I heard that you came up with it or helped develop it. Own it. Don't just give others.
No, the N train idea is not. I would love to take credit for it, but I think that idea was developed when I was an infant. Um,
7 years old.
uh, the extending the N train was originally proposed in the 1990s,
Okay.
and it was. You might be thinking of something else I proposed, but it was proposed in the 1990s, but shot down because there was a lot of community opposition at the time in Astoria. People don't want elevated trains to be extended through their neighborhood, you know. Um, so the most politically viable alternative is the Cuomo Plan. It will basically piss off the least amount of people in theory, because
But it'll make me late for my flight, essentially.
but it's not going to provide a convenience that really warrants the price. And you're also switching modes of transit multiple times. So if you're a family that has bags of luggage and kids,
It's a disaster.
it's not a great choice to get to LaGuardia. You're still going to take a taxi because, at best, you're taking one subway line or one commuter rail line and then having to switch onto an air train. So most likely more people would be taking more transfers than that, like if you're coming from uptown or parts of Brooklyn or Long Island or wherever. So it doesn't provide like the best access. Beefing up bus service is probably like the better, cheaper approach. Put down dedicated bus lanes and have a bunch of buses running from Harlem and from Elmhurst, in that area of Queens.
Tell me about this proposed congestion pricing zone.
Yeah, congestion pricing was approved by the New York State Legislature in 2019. That was a big victory for us because we had been pushing for congestion pricing for a number of years, I think since the Bloomberg era. But so Cuomo finally says, congestion pricing, its time has come. And basically what that's doing is charging private vehicles that enter lower Manhattan below 60th Street. They have this system set up in London, Stockholm, Singapore, and a number of other cities. But the intention of it is to reduce traffic congestion while at the same time raising money that will go directly into investing in public transit. It's a successful program in other cities, and we expect it to be successful here. The problem is that out of more political spite, we're assuming the Trump administration has pretty much blocked it from moving forward without giving any rationale for that. We expect the Biden administration to move it along as soon as he gets into office, but with all the delay that's happened because of the Trump administration, we probably will not be seeing congestion pricing being implemented in New York City until 2023.
Wow. Wow. So let's loosen up the tie a little bit for me. Okay. I'll take off a button. You loosen up the tie because coming out of COVID, I just want to know some of your predictions. I mean, the bubonic plague, after the bubonic plague, we ran into, the Renaissance era. And after the Spanish flu, we ran into, of course, the Roaring 20s. So you have a rebirth that is going to happen after this coronavirus pandemic is over. What do you think are some measures that will stay, and what are some measures that will go? And what I'm speaking to really is we've seen that really doctor's visits can be done over the phone. We have seen that we can even keep personal relationships like, we FaceTime, we say what up, it's all cool. What's going to stay? What's going to go? Will I still be wearing a mask in 2022?
Well, wearing a mask, I mean, I feel like that will stick around in our culture for a while, even after the pandemic, because I think a lot of people are going to see the benefits to it besides protecting themselves from COVID. I mean, the mask also protects you from the common cold, the flu, and everything else that is spread through droplets in the air. I think now it's not seen as such a foreign concept in our society anymore. So will we probably see more people wearing masks, even if it's not mandated on public transit anymore? Probably. I don't think that that's a bad thing. Um, I think that
Would
transit in
you
the future,
mandate it if you were in charge? If you
would
were
I
in
man?
charge, would you mandate it?
I would keep it mandated until the CDC says that it's no longer necessary. Like once they've gotten the virus levels down.
But if you're saying it's going to protect us from the flu and other common things, wouldn't it not just be a
Well,
common? Is it a common courtesy, or is it just a general protection mandate that everybody should wear a mask while on public transit?
yeah, I mean, I don't think that they'll be looking to like keep that specific measure mandatory. I don't know if there'll be a lot of support for keeping it mandatory, just because those other things that spread around through water droplets, they're not really as deadly as COVID. Um, so I think you just leave it to people's choice once we get past the pandemic. But the real problem after the pandemic will be funding for mass transit. I mean, it's actually a problem for the transit agencies right now. The MTA is waiting for Congress to approve $12 billion in an emergency cash infusion. Otherwise, they're looking at cutting service 40% on the subway and buses and 50% for the commuter rail systems, which is Long Island Railroad and Metro North. Um, that will take years to recover from. And what looks like we're almost certainly heading into that doomsday scenario.
How is congestion pricing implemented in a way that doesn't disproportionately impact commuters on the lower income scale?
Good question. So they are exploring exemption programs for congestion pricing, particularly for people who are below a certain income level, as well as some people they're trying to do exemptions for essential workers like police and fire. We're trying to advocate for as few exemptions as possible because from the data that we've looked at, the majority of people who are low income in New York travel by public transportation. They actually can't afford to drive a car in New York City because it's a very expensive thing to do in New York. The majority of people, period, travel by public transit in New York City. So really, it's an equitable program because all of the money that's raised by congestion pricing goes directly into investing in and expanding public transportation, which ultimately helps lower income people all across the city.
Speaking about fire and police and all our great first responders out there, being that you grew up in the 9/11 era and letting some personal info out, your father was a firefighter, correct?
Correct.
How do you think, you were impacted by 9/11? How do you feel that the generation below is going to be impacted by COVID, the COVID time, the year, the two lockdown?
I think that's really hard to say. I mean, it all depends on how they're perceiving it from a young. Hard for me to say. 25, so I'm approaching it from a very like adult rational perspective. But when 9/11 happened, that's really what got me this whole career of urban planning and transportation, because it was so impressionable on me when I was like old at the time. I became fascinated with politics, uh, in infrastructure and infrastructure disruption. I was very fascinated by how our country could be shut down on that scale. And also it was very fast, the rebuilding effort of Lower Manhattan. So that's really what got me planning. So I don't know, it might spur a lot of people get into public health, get things of that sort. All we're seeing now, all people who are on the front lines help others, and I think that's probably inspiring to a lot of people.
I definitely agree with you in terms of definitely inspiring. And, myself growing up, looking back at 9/11 and watching, everything change. There was no TSA growing up for me. That didn't exist. I can remember being able to have my family members and or pickup person meet me at the gate to pick me up. So the things that changed due to terrorism to me are pretty much at a convergence really with what's going to happen with travel and this pandemic. I really do believe that masks will become mandatory on airplanes, and I don't think that should be a problem. I don't think that there should be an argument about that. I don't think that that should be political at all. And I would like to really thank you for joining me. But before we get off, we always ask some cool, kitschy questions. So I want to know, what is your transit playlist? What is on your transit playlist when you are riding the train?
Whew, that's a good question. What's on my transit playlist? I play a lot of Tribe Called Quest, The Baby, Kendrick Lamar, revealing a little bit about myself, I guess. It all depends on my mood.
It's all hip hop, it appears. It's all hip hop, it appears, which is great. Which is great. How did you feel living in New York City, and not only living through the pandemic, but also living through the protests? What was that like for you?
Well, it was quite amazing to be in New York during this transformational period, because I felt like one of the things that I was interested in with 9/11 was what was it like to have been in New York during like such a historical event. And now, I mean, this isn't 9/11, but this pandemic is also
It's historic.
And New York City, especially in the beginning of this pandemic, was the epicenter of it. And then, of course, with the civil unrest that was happening, it really just felt like, I don't know, it's like, is this what the 60s felt like? Like for my mom when she was younger, like the world just kind of felt so uncertain, and there was more bad news than there was good news. But the most beautiful thing about all of that terrible stuff going on in the outside world was that when I'd walk outside my apartment, I saw a community that was more alive than I had seen at any time before the pandemic. With everybody working from home, and I live in a more residential area of uptown Manhattan. There was, grandparents outside. There were children playing in the street. Everyone was wearing masks and being respectful of each other. But it was the most community I had seen. And then on top of that, with the outdoor dining, once they started to roll back restrictions and allow outdoor dining, which to our credit, we helped advocate and make permanent year round. The city feels a bit more like Europe now, and some great progress was made in redesigning the streetscapes that a year ago we would have never thought we could have gotten something like this done, where we have outdoor
dining here to stay. How do you think it's going to work in the winter months? How are, another struggling industry, transit is struggling, needs funding. Hospitality is struggling and needs funding. And of course, both industries really require everybody to have a vaccine. How can transit help get the vaccine implemented? How can we
Well,
help get people there?
to get a vaccination, I mean, the city in New York in particular, they use public transit for advertising, Department of Health things all over. You know, they have digital billboards, they have the paper advertisements that are up in the subway. So I think it's just like doing a whole public information campaign. They can use the Link NYC kiosks that are that replaced phone booths on New York City sidewalks that, you know, are like the digital screen and the phone. They can It will just take investing money in a marketing campaign to push people to go and get the vaccine, make sure that it's available in, you know, widespread locations, like widespread throughout the city, and, you know, make it free. You know, if it's possible. I mean, that's the only way that you're really going to be able to do it. Put in requirements that kids can't go to school unless they're vaccinated, like we have for other vaccines. You know, things of that sort. I mean, some places are even talking about like music festivals aren't going to allow you to go unless you have a proof of vaccination. Who knows? That might become true for flying on airplanes, as somebody here in the comments has mentioned. So there's a lot of things that can be done. Public transit, the agencies can't require that you show proof of vaccination to ride a bus or a subway, just because that would be a logistical nightmare. There's too many using the system.
Too many people using the system. It would be difficult to implement. Did you have Jake Paul or Nate Robinson winning the fight?
Nate Robinson.
You had Nate Robinson. So did I. And I'm disappointed. So shouts to Nate. Shouts to Nate. That's all I can say, right? Shouts to Nate.
Yeah, I guess that's all you can say.
That's all you can say. That's all you can say. Well, I just want to thank Liam Blank for joining us tonight. And I hope to see you soon, my friend. And stay smiling, stay beautiful, and we will talk soon. Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it.